Today is Halloween, and because it's Halloween, I wanted to look back at all of the different Halloween events that happened in Pokemon Go and talk about the ones that I particularly enjoyed and talk about the ones that I felt like missed the mark. And maybe we can make a determination on what Niantic could do for future Halloween events to make them even better than the ones that we've been getting. So, yeah, this is going to be a fun video, and I really hope you enjoy it. Let's roll the intro and get right into it. Alright, what's happening everyone? Count Jinsula here. Actually, I am Bobby from K-Pop Demon Hunters.
Huntrix! Yay!
I hope you're having a good day, and let's get into the video. So, today is Halloween, and I wanted to kind of do something different. I wanted to take a look back at previous Halloween events and talk about all of the things that I really enjoyed about them, kind of share some of my own personal memories. Of course, I am a day one player. I've been playing Pokemon Go for the past 9 or 10 years, pretty much since day one. And that means I've experienced every single Halloween event that we ever had in Pokemon Go. And for some of you who might have started more recently, you probably have no idea the journey that the Halloween event has had, where the Halloween event that we currently have right now in Pokemon Go is vastly different from all of the Halloween events that we had initially. So yeah, I think this will be a lot of fun. I do think that for a lot of people, this is going to be one of those walking down memory lane kind of videos, and yeah, I really hope you end up enjoying it. Right, so let's kick this off by talking about the very first Halloween event, which we had in 2016. And a lot of players will look back at this event and have rose-tinted goggles because they feel like the impact of this event was so major. The reason why they might feel that is because this was essentially the first major in-game event happening in Pokemon Go. So it was kind of like the first experience of having different spawns and having more of a themed kind of aspect of Pokemon Go, and for what it's worth, I thought it was okay. I mean, it's not going to be anything like the more recent in-game events that we've had. Niantic has certainly grown and developed in-game events over the years, but this very first event, I thought like, it was just really exciting, personally. But if you look at it on paper, it wasn't necessarily that good. We had a couple of in-game bonuses that were related to doubling up the amount of candy that you get. I think that bonus alone was really special for a lot of Pokemon Go players, mainly because back then we didn't have anything like rare candies or pinap berries or anything like that. Basically, every Pokemon gave 3 candies. And to evolve Pokemon, to fill up your Pokedex, you need to farm up a ton of a particular Pokemon. And granted, yes, back then we only had maybe like 90 species or Pokemon that we could get. We didn't have the full 151 Kanto Pokemon. It was basically just a bunch of Pokemon that are quite common nowadays, and yeah, that was pretty much it. So it felt really good. You know, up until that point, we only saw maybe Pidgeys and Rattatas and occasionally something that was different from those two. And instead, we had a whole bunch of Ghost-type Pokemon, which I think at that point was actually quite rare. You did not see any of the wild spawns typically. So it was really exciting to see them. Pokemon like Ghastly, I think Abra was also one of the wild spawns. It just felt really cool, and it felt like something that could have been the start of something special, and it kind of ended up being that way. Now, if we were to move on to 2017, I think the major highlight for this particular event is the introduction of Pikachu wearing a witch hat. I do not recall if this was the first costumed version of Pikachu that we've ever seen. I think we also had like a Santa hat Pikachu right before this. But I could be wrong there. Maybe the Santa hat Pikachu debuted afterwards. I don't know. But that was essentially the biggest highlight. They did introduce a whole bunch of new Pokemon alongside this, and this was actually the first Halloween event that had shinies. So that was essentially a big part of it. I think for me personally, I really enjoyed the shiny hunt. There were certainly a couple of ghost-type Pokemon where you probably wouldn't see them again. So a lot of people were clamoring to get the shiny versions of those ghost-type Pokemon, and it really felt kind of exciting. It felt like it was definitely a step up from the previous year, and you could really see the development of Pokemon Go with this particular event. There was just a whole bunch of new features related to some of the things that Niantic had added, like shiny Pokemon, and of course, costume Pokemon as well. This was kind of like the first foray into seeing costume Pokemon in Pokemon Go. And then next we move on to the following year, which is 2018. And for this particular Halloween event, the thing that I remember the most is that they saw the debut of Altered Form Giratina. That was like the big thing with this particular Halloween. They put it all over the promotional materials, like Giratina Altered Form was going to be obtainable. And I think at the time it was really exciting because we've never seen legendary Pokemon with the ghost typing, so a lot of players thought it would be incredibly good. And it turned out it was. I think Giratina Altered Form was a very powerful Pokemon at the time, but I think a lot of players were hoping for the origin form of Giratina. But still, it felt very legendary, it felt very new. I think for a lot of players, this was one of those Halloweens that actually drew them in. I do think the raiding content being added into this event was something that was a bit of a good move. But of course, they did not really continue that for the following years. I think they did bring in some raid bosses every now and then, but they were typically costume Pokemon rather than actual legendaries. Actually, now that I think about it, I think they do include legendary raids, but they just don't put as much of an emphasis on it like they did for this particular Halloween. So yeah, at the very least, this was a pretty good one, in my opinion. I certainly had a lot of fun. And of course, they introduced more shinies and I think some more Pokemon as well, some new costume Pokemon. I actually think this was the first time we could get a shiny costume Pokemon in Pokemon Go. I could be wrong there, but yeah, I do remember going out and looking for the shiny which had Pikachu, which you couldn't get before. And I thought that was really exciting. Oh, and another thing regarding this event was that they introduced Spiritomb with this event. So Spiritomb was seen as kind of like a Halloween exclusive. That's the way that they treated it, and they have treated it since then. Basically, this was one of those Pokemon where you could only get it one time a year. So a lot of players were trying to get it. I do believe the only way you can get it was completing a special research of some kind, but yeah, that was something that was really special about this particular Halloween event, and I do think it does need to be noted. All right, and moving on to 2019, and I think the big feature for this one was the introduction of just a plethora of more costume Pokemon. It felt like they were starting to think of the Halloween event as their way of introducing a lot of different Pokemon variants, and yeah, that really did feel like the emphasis behind this event. It didn't generate a lot of exciting gameplay, in my opinion. I think the Pokemon that they chose to have costumes, like, they were okay. I think at the time there was a bit of a, kind of a little bit of an excitement about seeing stuff like Squirtle and Charmander and Bulbasaur with various costumes. But once players found out that you can't evolve them, that's when I think a lot of that excitement got drained almost instantaneously. So yeah, I think that was a bit of a misstep, and I think this Halloween could have had a little bit more exciting factors to it. The only thing that I remember regarding this Halloween was that they released, I believe they released Yamask. I think this was the Halloween they released Yamask, and I think for that Pokemon, a lot of people saw it just like Spiritomb as kind of like a Halloween exclusive, so people were out and about trying to get this Pokemon. And of course, they also released, I believe, Shiny Spiritomb as well, and considering the rarity of that Pokemon being a Halloween exclusive, a lot of people were looking to get that shiny. Actually, I'm completely wrong there because 2020's Halloween is actually when they released Shiny Spiritomb. I do remember that because this was essentially the one Halloween that was very unique compared to previous Halloweens, and that is specifically because of the pandemic. So a lot of players were actually in lockdown around the world. Some countries were still not in lockdown, but they actually pulled out a lot for this particular Halloween. They added Shiny Spiritomb, which I think a lot of players were hoping to get, and then they also included, I think, a new costume Gengar, but that was essentially it when it came to the new stuff, but it did feel like it was just very unique. It was one of those Halloweens where I look back at it and I remember it being really good, but then when I see everything that happened on paper, it didn't feel that impactful. But yeah, maybe it was just specifically because of Shiny Spiritomb. I think the release of that one shiny just injected a lot of excitement around the Halloween events. And a lot of players felt like these were the events where you really wanted to participate so you can get some exclusive Pokemon. Otherwise, you'd have to wait another year. And yeah, that's basically how it felt. I unfortunately could not get a Shiny Spiritomb out of this event. I would eventually get it later on, but Yeah, I do remember that shiny hunt being really exciting. A lot of players were out and about trying to get shiny Spiritomb, and that was definitely a major highlight for this particular Halloween event. Alright, and moving on to Halloween of 2021, the thing that I remember regarding this Halloween event is that there was just a lot more costume Pokemon. That's pretty much all they did. They also added, I believe, Galarian Slowking, which was definitely something very unique. I think Galarian Slowpoke was recently introduced in this particular time of the game's history, but yeah. Galarian Slowking and then a whole bunch of costume Pokemon. That was essentially the major highlight. So overall, it didn't feel that great. It didn't feel like it was a step up from the previous year. I think for them to not have something like Shiny Spiritomb definitely deflated this event a little bit, and it really started to feel like maybe with the Halloween events, they're going to start declining from this point on. But yeah, that's essentially really all that I have to say regarding this particular year. Of course, this was kind of like in the middle of the pandemic, so a lot of players couldn't even go out and play to begin with. But yeah, that's basically how 2021's Halloween event went down. Alright, and moving on to Halloween of 2022, I think this was pretty much at the heart of the pandemic, so at this point, pretty much everyone was locked down, and I think because of that, Niantic tried out something different, and what they did was that they had timed research as well as a special research that gave you a whole bunch of Yamask's and Galarian Yamask's, and I felt like that was kind of like the major thing with this event. But overall, it didn't feel like it was a step down from the previous year. Granted, the previous year was a step down from the year before that, but it just felt like this event was essentially kind of mid. It delivered on what it was supposed to deliver, but it didn't go above and beyond. And I think because of that, it's kind of forgettable. I think a lot of players do not necessarily remember 2022's Halloween. I think the one big major debut was Mega Banette, but aside from that, it didn't feel like there was anything special with this Halloween. They didn't introduce a whole bunch of new Pokemon. I think Noibat made its debut around this time, maybe with this event. But yeah, it just didn't feel that crazy. I feel like for a lot of Halloween events, they are typically treated as their way of debuting new ghost types. I think I didn't mention it earlier, but pretty much every single Halloween up until this point introduced some sort of new Pokemon, and I felt like this one, it did introduce new Pokemon, but it wasn't necessarily that impactful. So yeah, that's the way that I see it. I could be completely wrong, but I do remember this one being a bit forgettable. Alright, and moving on to 2023. I will say this Halloween was actually pretty good. It was kind of like, I believe this was one of the original ones where they split it into two parts, but it felt like there was a lot going on. It felt like they were doing a lot. I mean, you were out and about trying to get Pokemon like Phantump, you know, if you want to get Trevenants for PvP. I think Revard made its debut with this one, so we were seeing some new Pokemon finally in Pokemon GO. It did feel like it was a little bit better, and it was kind of like a step up from the previous year, but not by much. I do feel like from this point on, it didn't feel like Niantic was treating Halloween like it originally was, where they would see it as like a major event where they could introduce a whole bunch of cool stuff. It just felt like it was more of the same. More costume Pokemon, a couple of ghost types that they could debut, and essentially them trying out different things. But I did like a couple of things with this particular event, specifically that there was a huge push for PvP Pokemon, because certain Pokemon like Trevenant, I believe, were top of the meta at this time. So at least for myself, I was able to get myself a rank 1 Trevenant during this Halloween. Maybe it was the Halloween before, but yeah, that was really exciting. I felt like gameplay-wise, there was definitely a lot of engagement. So yeah, I do remember this one a little bit more fondly, and I do think it was a little bit of a step up from the previous year. Alright, and this brings us to last year's Halloween event, which is, of course, 2024, and the major highlight for this one was the introduction of Morpeko. And Morpeko was definitely one of those Pokemon that had a bit of an impact, considering it had a very unique ability, and on top of that, it was also considered a PvP staple because of that ability. So Morpeko could actually change forms depending on certain aspects of the gameplay, and you know, that would completely change its typing and give it a lot of different advantages in PvP. So a lot of players really wanted Morpeko. And that was essentially it. I think the big thing with this particular Halloween is that they just kind of treated it as like a big event where they would just have a whole bunch of different Pokemon. They would have a whole bunch of different stuff and candy bonuses and stuff like that. But aside from it, it didn't feel that special. It doesn't feel like for Halloween they've done anything really cool like they did in the past. Like, of course, the game is very different from what it was before. Obviously, the luster of a new kind of event, like, really can't be felt as much anymore. And then on top of that, with the Halloween event, it just feels like it's just a lot of content. That's really all they do. They introduced new costume Pokemon, they introduced a bunch of different stuff, and all the typical things with Halloween events like the candy bonuses. It just felt like it was more of the same. Maybe it's just because I've been playing since day one that I just know what to expect for Halloween by this point. It didn't feel like there was anything where I was like, holy cow, this is like one of the best events we've ever had. But yeah, I still felt like it was okay. I think Morpeko was definitely something that drove a lot of players to play during this particular event. And of course, the in-game decorations and things like that all looked really cool. So it definitely felt like a Halloween event. It just didn't feel like as crazy as it was in the past, where with the Halloween event, they would introduce shiny Pokemon, like new costume shinies. Shiny Spiritomb was like a big one. I think by this point, a lot of players don't necessarily have that great of a, I guess, impact that they used to have when it came to this event. All right, and finally, that brings us to this year's Halloween event, which is currently ongoing. And the one thing I will say is that this year's Halloween event does feel a little bit better. I don't know, like, I've actually been out and about playing, but I think a big reason for that is because I've been trying to level up. So I think that's the one thing with this year's Halloween event that it has going for it. They introduced the new leveling system right before it. So a lot of players are going on about playing. I think for me right now, I'm still stuck at level 70. I've been going about it in a very snail's pace, and I think a lot of players would fault me for that. But I've just been trying to take my time and enjoy it, and enjoy the process. And I've certainly been doing that with this year's Halloween. I think something in particular is that with, I think the Pokemon is called Punkaboo, like the XXL ones, like they're the ones that I've been looking for so that I could get the nice throws for the level 70 tasks. And yeah, it just feels fun. It just feels fun. Like, there's a bit of a shiny hunt aspect to this year that I really haven't felt in a while, in particular with all the costume Pokemon that I'm running into. It does feel like there is a bit of anticipation that maybe I'll come across a shiny Pokemon, and if I do, maybe I'll bottle cap it so I can make it a Shundo. Who knows? But yeah, it definitely feels like this year's Halloween event is a culmination of a lot of stuff that they've included up until now. Shiny hunting is a lot more exciting because of bottle caps, and then of course the new leveling system has got me totally engaged. So yeah, I will say this year's Halloween event has a lot going for it, but it's a lot of stuff that's outside of the Halloween event that is the reason for that. So yeah, take it for what you will. I think the Halloween events have always been pretty cool. They definitely utilize the Halloween events to introduce new stuff like new Pokemon and new shinies, but they've certainly been better in the past, at least a little bit more exciting in the past. Again, when you look at the Halloween events on paper, they've definitely iterated and added more stuff over the years, but the original Halloween events definitely had a bit of an excitement to it, mainly because it was kind of like the first of many. So a lot of players were experiencing new things for the very first time, and I think because of that, they always look back at those events a lot more fondly. And yeah, I totally agree with it. But anyway, that's basically going to be it. This was every single Halloween event that we've had up until now and my thoughts on every single one of them. Definitely share your thoughts. What was your favorite Halloween event? I would definitely like to know. Maybe I was completely wrong about some of these Halloween events. Maybe some of them were absolute blockbusters. I don't know. I would definitely like to know what you're thinking, because these are all just my personal opinions when I look back at all the Halloween events, but I'm sure other people have completely different thoughts, and I would definitely like to hear them. So make sure you share them in the comments below, and let's have a great discussion. And thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it to be enjoyable and insightful. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if it's your first time here, and don't forget that notification bell so you know exactly when I upload videos. And real quick, let me give a shout out to all of my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support the Jinsula channel, the best way you could do that is going to be by joining my Patreon. And if you decide to become a paid Patreon member, I'm actually going to personally add you to my Pokemon GO friends list. So that means for stuff like remote raids, the friendship system, opening and sending gifts, all that good stuff. If you want to play Pokemon GO with me, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. I'll put a link to it in the description below. And if you want to support my channel in a completely different way, you could do so by following me on social media. My handle is @CountJinsula. I'm on the platforms you see right now on the bottom of your screen. Go to any one of them and give me a follow. That'll be a huge help to my channel. And you'll be able to keep up with my daily life and see a lot of stuff that I only put on those social media pages. And that's going to be it for this video. I'm Count Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself today, have a happy Halloween, and I'll catch you all later.
Jinsula